Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Tessa Archibald. I'm the manager of the Homes for Horses Coalition. Welcome to the HHE's first webinar in a little while, Advocacy Strategies for Equine Rescues. As many of you are members, I'm sure you're familiar with the mission of the HHE, but for those who aren't, I'll share a short little introduction. The Homes for Horses Coalition has been active since 2008, when it started as a unique coalition to help horse rescues and ultimately help equines by ending horse slaughter. Today, the HHC is led by the Animal Welfare Institute in the American Wild Horse Campaign and has over 500 members who are equine rescue directors, equine professionals, and advocates. The HHC is dedicated to providing spaces for collaboration and connection within the equine rescue world, as well as continued learning through experiences such as this one, and through the extensive library of curated resources available on our website. Speaking of that website, it's in the process of a redesign right now, which is super exciting. The resources on that fresh site will be up to date and aimed at the further professionalization of equine rescue, standards for equine rescue, and also resources for advocacy. So that's what we're going to be talking about today, is how, as an equine rescue or sanctuary, you can be an effective advocate for horses and for legislation affecting all equines, including the SAFE Act, the GEO Act, and the Wild Horse and Burro Protection Act, among others. We have some great speakers with us today, including Dr. Joanna Grossman, who leads the equine program and is a lobbyist for the Animal Welfare Institute. We also have Holly Gambice, who is the Director of Government Relations at American Wild Horse Campaign. Last but not least, we have Michelle Patterson, who's also from AWHC, where she acts as the Grassroots Advocacy and Outreach Manager. As we get into the webinar, just a couple of things about the program of note. This webinar is being recorded and it will be available to watch in about 24 hours. So don't worry if you need to head out for any reason. As we go through, feel free to send any questions in the chat. I will try to answer them as soon as possible, or I might leave them until the end for our panelists to answer. We will try to get to as many as possible. On the right hand of the screen, you might also see we have a header called handouts. These will be referenced throughout, and you're welcome to download them and share them as you see fit. Also under that handouts, there's a page called resources. There's a couple links on there to AWI, to AWHC, and also to Boulder Advocacy, which has some awesome resources about advocating as a 501c3. As we go through, there also will be a couple questions and polls for you to engage with if you're interested. So thank you again so much for being here. My name is Tessa, and Holly is up first to share with us.
Hey there, everyone. So I am gonna pull up some slides here. All right. Well, I'm excited to chat with all of you today, and I wanted to start off by saying thank you for all of you who operate rescues and sanctuaries, because you are on the front lines saving equines from abuse, abandonment, and slaughter every single day. You do the work of angels, so thank you. And thank you for joining us today for this webinar. The idea of this webinar came about because we often hear from the rescue community that they want to help advance laws and policies to help protect equines, but they feel limited in what they're able to do, or they have some uncertainty. Some believe they cannot lobby because they are a 501c3 organization. So our goal today is to address some of this and empower you to advocate, because your voice as a rescue or a sanctuary is important. You'll see what we're planning to do is go through, lobbying, some advocacy strategies, and then we will go through, Joanna will be giving an overview of equine legislation in Congress. And my colleague Michelle and I will also be doing a couple of demonstrations as well today, just to show you an example of what it looks like to make a call to your legislator, or what a brief meeting with a legislator might look like. So let's go ahead and jump on in. So the big question that we get is, can 501c3 organizations lobby? And the answer is yes. 501c3 organizations can lobby. In fact, many C3 organizations lobby. I work for the American Wild Horse Campaign, which is a 501c3 organization, and I lobby. I'm a registered federal lobbyist. Joanna is also a registered lobbyist and works for a 501c3 organization, the Animal Welfare Institute. Another example that comes to mind is the Humane Society of the United States is also a 501c3 organization that lobbies as well. However, there are two key things here. So one is that 501c3s are limited in how much they can lobby. 501c3s are also strictly prohibited from engaging in something called electioneering. And we find that people usually confuse lobbying with electioneering. So as we're talking about this, we'll help clarify the difference between those. But first, let's look at lobbying. So per the IRS website, 501c3s are not prohibited from lobbying for legislation, but again, there's that limit on how much lobbying you can do. So per their website, lobbying is attempting to influence legislation by contacting or urging the public to contact members or employees of a legislative body for the purpose of proposing, supporting, or opposing legislation, or if the organization advocates for the adoption or rejection of specific legislation. So an example that comes to mind is of lobbying is urging a legislator to co-sponsor a specific bill. That would be in the realm of lobbying. Now, there are also a number of activities within the realm of public advocacy that do not constitute lobbying. For example, organizations may conduct educational meetings, prepare and distribute educational materials, or otherwise consider public policy issues in an educational manner. So for example, you can talk about your experience as a rescue, and some rescues put together educational materials on things like the horse slaughter issue. And some have talked to legislators expressing the strain that the horse slaughter industry has had on them as a rescue or a sanctuary. When it comes to lobbying as a C3 organization, the IRS, and just to flag this for everyone, and I won't get into too much detail, but essentially the IRS has two tests. One is called the insubstantial part test, which indicates that lobbying is an insubstantial part of your organization. The other is called the expenditure test, which limits lobbying to a certain percentage, certain dollar amount of your expenditures. So the IRS website provides a very helpful chart that tells you how much would apply to your specific organization. And I won't go into detail, like I said, about these two tests, but I will say that in general, I find that it's good practice to try to track your time that you spend engaging in lobbying activities. And, if you have specific questions about, is it lobbying? Is it not lobbying? Are you hitting your limit on how much lobbying you can do for that year? You can always talk to an attorney, talk to your accountant. Also, there's a really great organization. I provided a link here called Boulder Advocacy. It's an organization based in DC that helps inform nonprofits about how they can advocate, how they lobby. And they're great. They've got a lot of resources on their website. And I also included a link to the relevant IRS page for people to take a look at. So in general, I would encourage rescues and sanctuaries to lobby and engage in advocacy, to ask your representatives and your senators to support specific equine protection bills. Your voice matters in this issue. And, even if you are, again, worried about lobbying or you think you're coming too close to your limit, you can still educate and talk about your experience. Your voice really does matter. So then I just wanted to quickly talk about electioneering. And this is really straightforward, so I'm going to be brief about it. But I had mentioned in the beginning of this that 501c3 organizations are strictly prohibited from engaging electioneering. So lobbying and electioneering are different, right? So electioneering is when an organization engages in activities for or against political candidates. So an example that I think about is endorsing candidates for election. A C3 organization cannot endorse candidates for election. As another example, I would not, don't make a post on your rescue's Facebook page saying, vote for David Smith for Senate. Just don't do that. That's an example of electioneering. So now there are some specific, nonpartisan election-related activities that 501c3 organizations can be involved in. Again, educating candidates on public issues, getting out the vote, voter registration drives, that sort of thing. But you really want to stay away from electioneering. But the last thing I want to just flag for everybody is that, the IRS rules really pertain to the organization, the 501c3 organization, not individuals. So if you work for a 501c3 organization or you're on the board of a 501c3 organization, you can still engage in electioneering, political activity, advocacy and lobbying in your personal time. It just needs to be separate from your affiliation with the 501c3 organization in order to not put the tax exempt status at risk. So with all of that being said, we have established that you can lobby, you can engage in advocacy strategies. So what are some strategies that you can use? It has dawned on me that the very first step to think about is, how do you identify your legislators? We get this, it's a common question that we get all the time. You got to be able to find your legislator first, right? So every person has one representative and two senators. And I'm talking about the federal level. So the US Congress, your federal legislators in the Congress. So to find your representative, we've got some good information here on the slide with some links. To find your representative, you can go to this website, www.house.gov. And I provided a screenshot here so you can see what to expect. You'll see a little area in the corner, the upper corner of the page, where you can put in your zip code. And sometimes you might need to put in some more detail about your address information. But then that will show you who your representative is, and it'll provide all the contact information, their phone number. And then every legislator in Congress also has their own website as well. And then for the Senate, you can go to the Senate, senate.gov/senators to see who your two senators are for your state. So you can just go to the website and look up who the two senators are for your state, and both of those senators represent you. Okay, so once you've identified who your legislator is, what can you do from there? Calling your legislator. And I know people have probably heard this a million times that you should call your legislator. But the feedback that I get from so many people is that they're kind of nervous about it, right? So you're just kind of nerve-wracking. You're picking up the phone and calling your federal legislator, right? But it's actually one of the easiest and yet impactful things that you can do to ask your legislators to support or oppose a bill or an issue. Typically what you do once you've got the phone number, contact information, you just dial the number. Someone in the office will answer, or you might get an answering machine. That is also possible. And you give your name, and then you state that you're a constituent. And then you state what your specific ask is. So if you're asking them to co-sponsor a specific bill, you give them the name of the bill and the bill number. You might be asked for your zip code to confirm that you're a constituent. So I thought we would do just a quick little demonstration. So I've got Michelle here. Are you ready, Michelle? So what I'm planning to do is and we're going to show you like how quick and easy this is. Okay. So Michelle is calling her legislator. I'm going to pretend to be the legislator's office, right? So I'm a staffer for the legislator's office. And so she is going to call and make an ask. All right.
So I'm dialing Congresswoman Smith, we'll call you. Hello.
Hi.
My name is Michelle Patterson, and I am a constituent of Representative X. I am calling today to ask that he does not support legislation for funding ovarioectomies for wild horses.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for calling. And what is your zip code, can I ask?
It's 90210.
All right. Excellent. I will make a note of your message. Thank you for calling.
Thank you.
It's really that easy, everybody. It is a quick, and they keep track of what you've called about, what position you're asking them to take, and things like that. All right. So another helpful strategy as you're advocating for equine policy, improved equine laws, writing to your legislator. And your letter really does make a difference. And there are a couple of different ways that you could write to your legislator. One is, of course, you can always go to the AWHC or the AWI website. We have action alerts there that make it really easy for you to send a message to your federal legislators. But you can also go to your legislator's individual website. So for example, I mentioned earlier that each of your federal legislators has a website. You can go on there. There's a contact form, and you can fill that out, and that message will get to them. And my best advice on that is to always be polite to your legislators. Rely on facts and be concise. All right, so another strategy that is highly effective is meeting with your legislator. It is not as scary as it seems. Similar to making a phone call, it's really not that scary. So you can contact your legislator's local office to set up a meeting. Now, these days, some will do meetings in person in their district offices, their state offices, but many of them are still relying on video conferencing technology like Zoom. So Zoom, kind of like what we're doing now, more a virtual meeting type of format. So what I would certainly recommend is when you reach out and ask for a meeting, familiarize yourself with the format before the meeting. The last thing you want to do is have technical issues and end up missing your meeting altogether. And of course, be on time, be concise, and again, rely on facts and just be polite, really focus on building up that rapport. And one big piece of advice that I always give to people who are doing outreach to their legislators is, never guess or make anything up. If you get a question from the legislator, or in many cases, you'll be meeting with the legislator's staffer, which is just as impactful, but sometimes you'll get a question that, you don't 100% know what the right answer is. And that is okay. Never, ever lie. Never make up an answer. And it is perfectly good and acceptable to say, that's a great question, and I will actually look into that. And then I'll send you an email follow-up after our meeting, sending you that information. And on the upside, that's also a great opportunity to follow up with that office as well. So I think this was another area where we were going to do another quick demonstration again with Michelle. Michelle is going to be our lobbyist, and I will be the congressperson or the congressional staffer here. So you ready to get started, Michelle?
Sure.
Okay, ready? So we are going to, the goal here, guys, is that we're going to keep this pretty short. Now, in real life, your meeting might go anywhere from like 10 minutes to possibly even 30 minutes. But we're going to do kind of a short version because sometimes they are shorter. Sometimes, the legislator can only do maybe 5 minutes. So we're going to keep this one a little bit shorter, but Michelle is going to ask me about supporting some legislation. Okay, Michelle, go for it.
Hi. Thank you for meeting with me today. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you about equine protection, and I appreciate your time. I'm here today to ask you to co-sponsor the SAFE Act. It is a bill that will prevent horse slaughter plants from opening in the United States. And I was hoping that this would be something that you would be interested in co-sponsoring.
Oh, well, thank you so much for taking the time to meet with me today. I'm very interested in hearing about this a bit more. Tell me, why do you care about this issue? Why is this important to you?
There was a report that came out last year from the American Wild Horse Campaign, and it was a story in the New York Times, and it showed that there's a large number of wild horses that are being sent to slaughter. And that's when the issue became important to me. I had no idea that this practice was happening in the United States. And I feel pretty strongly that horses should not be sent to slaughter.
Wow. Yeah, this seems like something that I would like to know a little bit more about. Michelle, do you think you could tell me, I'd like to get maybe some statistics, some data, some numbers, just to get an idea of the scope of this issue. I'd really like to get some details about, what are the number of horses that are going into slaughter every year? How many are going this year, last year, over the past 5 years? Can you give me maybe a glimpse of, the numbers involved in that?
That's a great question. I don't have that information with me, but I would be happy to look into that and get some information to send to you via email.
All right. Okay. That would be great. I appreciate that.
Well, thank you for your time today. I appreciate you meeting with me, and I will follow up with you shortly after I get the rest of the information that you requested. Have a great day.
Thank you so much. See, guys, that is just a quick example of just really how easy it can be. I posing as a legislative staffer, I'm asking for something that's, kind of detailed. You want some numbers over the past few years, and maybe you didn't anticipate getting that type of question. You don't want to guess, and you don't want to make anything up. You want everything to be based in facts. So Michelle did exactly the right thing, said, hey, I'm going to follow up with that information. And, I'll just add in there that I love encouraging rescues and sanctuaries to reach out and get meetings with their federal legislators, because your voice really, truly does matter. You offer a very unique perspective about what is happening on the ground regarding the welfare of our cherished equines. Now, hopping into just a few more strategies that can be highly effective in advocacy. Town halls. Town halls are still a thing. Many of you probably heard about it. Many of you have probably been to a town hall. Now, they're a little bit different these days. They have really changed over the years, I feel like. But town halls, sometimes they're virtual now. Oftentimes, I feel like they're virtual, or they occur on the phone. The best way to find out about town halls and maybe other events that your legislator might be holding is, again, go to your legislator's website and sign up for their email list. They have a way for you to subscribe to their email list. So that way you can get emails letting you know about when they're doing town halls, when they want to hear about your opinion, when they're doing events in the community so they can meet with their constituents. And then I also wanted to flag letters to the editors and op-eds. That is another, still very useful tool for advocating for equine welfare. These are generally published online. Many people perhaps don't really read the traditional newspaper anymore in print, but they are typically published online, which in some ways means that your letter to the editor can reach a much broader audience than it did many years ago. So I always encourage, check your local newspaper for their submission instructions. Every newspaper is different. Some will limit you to only about 200 words. Some will be as few as 150 words. So you have to be really concise about making your point. If you're trying to get your legislator to co-sponsor a bill like the SAFE Act, if they haven't co-sponsored already, you can mention that in your letter. Say that you urge your representative to co-sponsor this bill. Or another great idea is to consider thanking your legislator for co-sponsoring a bill like the SAFE Act. Mention them by name. they will see it. If you mention your legislator by name in your LTE, they all have communications directors that do media monitoring, and they will see it. And it can go a long way for a legislator to be thanked for something. And then I'm also going to flag the Animal Welfare Institute has a great tool on their website as well that helps with submitting LTE. So that link is in there. Social media is another big one that I want to flag for everybody. Sometimes I feel like it is just one of the most useful tools these days as far as raising awareness, contacting your legislators. So typically what I advise people to do is follow your legislators' accounts. You know, your representative, your 2 senators, they have Facebook pages that you can follow. They also have Twitter accounts that you can follow as well. You can post messages on your legislator's Facebook page. You can also tweet at them on Twitter. And staffers will see your messages. They will see it. Again, every office has a communications director, and they all constantly monitor the media and social media as well. But what I always urge people is to be polite. I kind of love this quote. We don't have a choice on whether we do social media. The question is how well we do it, right? And I always tell people to, like, be wise when you're using social media, because it can be very easy to start, you know, emotions start, you know, flying, and just try to be as polite as you can, because it will go a long way and is much more effective than being hostile. I also encourage that for the purpose of raising awareness, you know, follow the Homes for Horses Coalition Facebook page. You can share our Facebook posts from the public HHC Facebook page. Also, AWHC and AWI, you know, we have active Facebook and Twitter accounts, so do feel free to follow us, share some of the information that we post. And it's a great way to, you know, help with raising awareness. And then finally, my last point is on coalition building. Strong coalitions win, and we are stronger together. So the Homes for Horses Coalition is another, just a key example of, you know, a strong coalition that can achieve amazing things when we're working together. Absolutely do not hesitate to network with fellow HHC members, and, you know, maybe look for other local horse rescues in your state or your area who might be interested in joining. You know, maybe they would be a good fit for the coalition. And again, you know, we're stronger together. So everyone, thanks so much for taking the time to listen about these strategies. And then I am going to go ahead and kick it over to Joanna. And Joanna is going to go through some of the pieces of legislation that are in the Congress right now and the status of those.
Thanks so much, Holly, and thank you, everybody, for joining today. I really appreciate it. I'm just pulling up slides right now. There we go. Great. So I wanted to start with, not surprisingly, the SAFE Act, which was in a lot of ways the impetus behind the Homes for Horses Coalition many years ago. And this is a bill that you all are probably very familiar with already, so I don't want to spend a lot of time on sort of the major talking points. But as you know, this is a bill that would permanently ban horse slaughter in the US and ban the export of equines abroad for purposes of slaughter for human consumption. So I wanted to provide more of a status update and talk about next steps and, you know, where we are this session of Congress with the SAFE Act. So the good news is that there really has been extraordinarily strong momentum on the issue of horse slaughter this Congress. I'm going to go over sort of a number of the key victories that we've seen. So the House Transportation Package that passed last summer included a ban on horse slaughter, and that passed easily by voice vote and had a very strong bipartisan support. And actually, as an interesting aside, so the Homes for Horses Coalition weighed in, and the lead sponsor talked about the Homes for Horses Coalition and its work on the floor of the House during the vote. So that was really fantastic to see. And unfortunately, the Senate's Transportation and Infrastructure package did not ultimately consider a similar amendment that was filed, and that was the version that ultimately made it into law. But it was still very encouraging to see that momentum and that vote occur in the House last summer. In terms of the SAFE Act, the standalone bill, it currently has 219 co-sponsors, which is over half of the House of U.S. Representatives. So that's obviously an important marker to reach to show that should this bill come before a vote before the full House, it would pass because it does have extraordinarily strong support. We'd like that number to be higher, so that's where you guys come in terms of weighing in with congressional offices. You know, for example, under current House rules, if a bill has 290 co-sponsors, it can move directly to the floor for a vote. So that's ideally the type of threshold that we would like to see for the SAFE Act and for all of these other equine bills that we're advocating for. I'll discuss the appropriations angle later on, but just wanted to mention that for the first time, the House actually included a provision that would permanently ban the operation of slaughter facilities in the U.S. for horses. The FY23 process is still playing along, but that was certainly very encouraging to see that happen for the first time. But back to the SAFE Act. So the good news is that the bill passed unanimously out of subcommittee earlier this summer. As you all probably know, Congress recently came back from its long summer recess, so now is definitely the critical time for lawmakers to be hearing from their constituents on this bill so it doesn't sort of fall by the wayside or get lost in the shuffle, especially kind of in this mad dash as the clock is ticking on the current session of Congress, and it is an election year, of course, to sort of further complicate matters. So in terms of a status update with the SAFE Act, we are in a bit of a holding pattern, I would say. With so many competing priorities, it's often hard to get members of Congress and committee staff to prioritize standalone equine bills, as you might expect, but we certainly need to keep pushing. During the subcommittee markup that happened in June, as some of you may know, Congressman Armstrong of North Dakota offered and then withdrew an amendment to the SAFE Act that would have altered the language to change it such that a person would have to knowingly engage in the delivering, possessing, shipping, transporting, etc. of a horse for slaughter to be held accountable for that. So he ultimately withdrew that amendment and spoke very favorably on the issue as a whole. But, you know, that sort of amendment was, from our perspective, and I'm sure many others in the advocacy community, problematic because with the current text, it's phrased such that an individual needs to have reason to believe that such a thing could occur. It's very difficult, as you might expect in law enforcement, to basically prove that somebody knew X was going to happen when they engaged in that activity. So I cannot stress, again, how important it is for lawmakers to be hearing right now that this is a top-of-mind priority for HHC members who can speak with authority on these and countless other equine issues. So definitely want to make sure you're reaching out and letting them know that it should come up for the full committee to get advanced and move to the floor for a vote. So moving on to the PAST Act. This is another extremely well-supported equine protection bill. Again, one that many of you are probably already familiar with. But just as a synopsis, the PAST Act deals with the horrific abuses that are associated with horse soring. So soring can involve a wide range of practices that all involve intentionally inflicting pain on a horse's hooves and front limbs to produce an exaggerated high-stepping gait. This is for Tennessee walking horse shows in particular and some related breeds, and this unnatural high-stepping gait is referred to as the big lick. And the methods, again, they're really horrific. This includes grinding down the hoof to expose sensitive tissues, applying chemicals to burn a horse's flesh, inserting sharp objects into the sole of the hoof, and using extremely large stacked shoes and chains to exacerbate the pain that these animals feel. So the PAST Act passed the House last Congress by an overwhelming majority of 333 to 96. So really strong showing, and we were happy to see. The bill currently has 259 co-sponsors in the House and 53 in the Senate. And like SAFE, it was referred to the Energy and Commerce Committee and was also unanimously approved during that same subcommittee markup in June. In fact, a few of the members of Congress who actually voted against the PAST Act last Congress voted in favor of it this time. So we were really happy to see that sort of positive outcome. In terms of where we're at in the process, committee staff is soliciting technical assistance from USDA, and that's just a normal part of the legislative process for plenty of bills where basically get feedback from the agencies involved. And I do want to mention briefly, even though we are talking about legislation for the purposes of this webinar, in the context of PAST specifically, it is worth noting that we are cautiously optimistic that USDA itself will be moving forward with new regulations that would mirror many of the same elements of the PAST Act. USDA had tried to finalize, did finalize them in 2017, and then they were withdrawn by the prior administration. And then with Secretary Vilsack back once again, the administration made clear and announced and put it on the regulatory agenda that they were planning to move forward with updated regulations to combat the issue of soaring, to end the industry self-policing scheme that has been a total failure for decades. And hopefully we will see a number of key elements, such as banning the action devices that are involved in inflicting pain and so on. So sort of stay tuned there. We're, like I said, cautiously optimistic that those will be finalized in the not so distant future. So with this slide here, I'm not expecting everybody to read all of these names that are listed here, but I did just want to showcase the many members of the Energy and Commerce Committee, since these are, like I said, pivotal, instrumental individuals when it comes to moving both the SAFE Act and the PAST Act. As you heard Holly talk about, please do look up your member of Congress. If your member of Congress is on this committee, it is especially important that they hear from you on equine bills and the need to move these out of committee into the floor for a vote. So I want to turn briefly to two new equine priority bills that were introduced for the first time this session of Congress. And I do want to hit upon some of the main talking points and rationales behind the bills, since these aren't going to necessarily be as familiar to Congress. As a constituent, if you're reaching out, it might actually be the very first time that they're hearing about them because they are brand new. So the EGL Act, which was introduced by Congressman Don Beyer of Virginia, focuses on an issue that is really increasingly garnering significant media attention, I would say, because I think many are shocked to learn that donkeys fall victim to this trade and are used and killed for the purpose of making this gelatin that is made from boiling donkey hides. And it is used, as you can see, in some cosmetics and traditional medicines. And then I encourage you guys to look at the handouts tab. We provided a good sort of overview article from AWI's quarterly magazine that talks about this issue in greater depth. But many people are shocked to learn that the United States is, in fact, the third largest importer of products containing EGL after mainland China and Hong Kong, with approximately 12 million in annual imports. So this means that the United States can play an important role in protecting burros at home and abroad. Sadly, millions are killed every year for this trade. And I would say that just as we've seen some really excellent progress in recent years, especially among federal lawmakers on trying to tackle, for example, the trade in shark fins, I think this is another issue where we have good potential to garner strong bipartisan support and to really sort of show that the U.S. can be a leader in clamping down on this trade and decreasing demand for this product and for the industry as a whole. And again, this is a new bill. It only has, I believe, 7 co-sponsors at the moment, so it's important to let lawmakers know about it and hopefully build support so that we can eventually get this passed. And like PAST and SAFE, was actually referred to E&C, so that's another one to highlight for that committee in particular. The last standalone bill that I want to touch on is the Wild Horse Act, which was introduced by Congresswoman Titus, who really is a tremendous leader on wild horse issues in particular and animal protection more broadly. The bill was introduced after a really horrific incident that occurred during a roundup in the Pancake Complex in Nevada, where, as you can see in the bullet on the slide, a young colt suffered a broken leg while being relentlessly chased by a helicopter. You can find footage of this online, I would warn you, it is heartbreaking. It's graphic to see. Eventually, the animal was euthanized, but seeing this poor colt struggling to run on a broken leg while helicopters are chasing is not a sight that anybody wants to see. Nobody wants to see their taxpayer dollars supporting that kind of brutality, of course. So, even though this was, of course, just one incident that garnered a lot of media attention, the truth is that we regularly see such outcomes, and AWHC sends observers into the field and documents a lot of the injuries and fatalities that occur. You will see horses who break necks, break legs. We've seen things in recent roundups like a mare who died of a ruptured uterus, foals dying from extreme exhaustion. Again, this is not a method that we want to see being used to round up horses. And obviously, we take issue with the broken system that the Bureau of Land Management perpetuates. The vast majority of the BLM's wild horse and burro program budget goes towards the system of rounding up horses, wild horses from the range, and then shifting them into holding facilities for the rest of their lives. And it's a very big budget. I mean, they're on track potentially to receive over $150 million each year. So definitely not chump change. And we would much rather see the BLM applying those resources towards administering safe and proven immunocontraceptive vaccines to keep horses and burros on the range where they belong. And then last but not least, I just wanted to touch briefly on appropriations. It's kind of a wonky issue, but it's one of my favorites. Appropriations refers to the essentially must-pass spending bills that Congress has to sign into law to keep the federal government running. This is, in terms of the legislative process, this is a really good means to actually secure some victories in the animal protection and equine protection specifically spheres. Again, because these are bills that Congress does absolutely have to pass. So again, as many of you are probably aware, it is through the appropriations process, for example, that horse slaughter facilities do not currently operate here in the U.S. There are provisions that bar them from legally operating. And as I mentioned, we were pleased to see that the House passed bill included language that would make that permanent, at least in terms of their operations on U.S. soil. The Senate version just has this more standard defund language. So in the weeks and months ahead, we're looking for an omnibus package to come together. So again, that's something you can weigh in on with lawmakers about to tell them you'd like to see the strongest possible version of that language. And then also in terms of a nice victory that AWI and AWHC have worked very hard to secure, there is $11 million that's set aside in both the House and Senate Interior Appropriations bills for the Bureau of Land Management to use proven and humane fertility control vaccines to manage horses on the range. And like I said, hopefully keep them there and break that broken system of brutal helicopter roundups and shifting these horses and breaking families apart and moving them into holding facilities. So with that, I think we are ready to open it up to questions, but I will pause there and thank you guys again.
Thank you so much, Joanna and Holly and Michelle, for all that information. It was amazing. I don't see any questions at the moment. Feel free to throw them in the chat. If we don't have any questions, I am going to release a couple polls. Feel free to answer those polls, which are super helpful to us in making new webinars that are helpful to you in the future. There's one. Let's see. And then we are also curious about what other kind of webinars you would like to see in the future. So we will definitely continue to have information and resources for advocacy, but there's lots of other avenues and connections that hopefully we can help you with in the equine rescue community. So I am looking forward to seeing everybody's answers on there. Unless we have any other questions. Oh, here we go. Alexis is curious about how do you become a federally registered lobbyist? I don't know if Joanna or Holly, you want to speak to that?
Holly, you're muted. Looks like you were going to answer.
Yeah, so there are some rules put forth by the Congress that require an individual to lobby or to register once they've conducted a certain amount of lobbying. And so then once that's done, there's just a process online where you go on there and you register, and then you are required to do regular disclosure reports. Talking about, what you're lobbying on, have you been making political contributions, things like that. So, but for the most part, it is an online registration process. But once you do register, you have to, you also have to be familiar with the ethics code. You need to adhere to that, and there are various, requirements that are going to be put on you at that point. Joanna, did you have anything else to add?
No, I mean, typically individuals who become registered lobbyists, it's because they sort of communicate frequently with congressional offices. So, if you're just popping in once in a blue moon, you're not really, there's no need to be a registered lobbyist. But it's a pretty straightforward process. But, again, it's sort of for people who are regularly in dialogue or communication with Hill staff.
Thank you for those answers. Hopefully, Alexis, that helped you out a little bit. Audrey has a question about what are the best ways to engage on the SAFE and PAST acts?
Well, thanks, Audrey, for the question. I think that really meeting directly with lawmakers and their staff is extremely effective. And frankly, because of the pandemic, it's a lot easier to do because you can quickly set up a Zoom meeting. I cannot stress enough how important it is for them to hear from individuals with expertise on equine welfare. So many rescues have, of course, are really the boots on the ground and have done a lot of the hard work in terms of rescuing at-risk horses. So who better to speak to Hill staff and educate them on this issue? And again, with PAST Act, to be able to really convey, an understanding of horses' physiology, to explain, the nature of why this abuse is so horrific. They really want to hear from the experts, not sort of talking heads in DC. So I think that setting up meetings is extremely effective. It's easy to do. These are just like informational sessions. They just want to learn more about the issue. And with so many competing priorities, it is very important to constantly keep this sort of at the front burner, so to speak. And, I would also note that in terms of placing calls or doing meetings or sending action alerts, each congressional office has a specific staff person, at least one, that is dedicated to working on a portfolio that includes animal protection issues. So they absolutely keep track of who reaches out to them and how often, what are the issues that are garnering lots of support. They definitely do keep track of that information and they take note. And I also think in terms of engaging with the SAFE Act and the PAST Act, again, to go back to some of the points that Holly raised during her portion of the presentation, I think, again, op-eds, LTEs, lawmakers like to pay attention to what newspapers and other outlets in their districts are saying about issues. And these are things that just attract interest among a general audience. There's so many horse lovers out there. So I think that trying to publish op-eds and LTEs, it's definitely worth doing. And especially with social media, like Holly alluded to, things can get a much wider reach and be shared many, many times. So I encourage people to do that as well. Holly, I don't know if you wanted to add to that.
Yeah, and I would say that if people need talking points for their LTEs, their op-eds, or for their meetings, you can absolutely go to the AWHC website, the AWI website. We have a lot of materials. You can also just reach out to us. Actually, if y'all don't mind, I was going to maybe pop up Michelle and Tessa's email information. So I just wanted to make sure everybody has that there. Also, if you would be interested in setting up a meeting with your legislator, but, maybe you're still a little unsure, you want to talk through it or just need a little assistance on how to do that, do absolutely feel free to reach out to Michelle or Tessa. Not to speak for Michelle, but does this all the time. She's quite good at this, and I think pretty easy to talk to, and is always happy to help kind of like work you through that and make it as smooth and painless as possible, because it is really a good experience.
I would be very happy to help. And just to reiterate to everyone, we've all done this the first time. I can share with everyone that I was very nervous the first time I met with a member of Congress. So it's perfectly normal, but feel free to reach out with any questions. Zoom, I'd be happy to jump on a Zoom meeting just to sort of do a mock trial, a mock meeting. I would be happy to do that.
Thank you so much, Michelle. That's going to be so helpful to people, and awesome advice, Joanna and Holly. We have one more question at the moment. Jen is curious about the EGO Act and what products the GO is in.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm certainly not a true expert on this issue by any means, but in terms of the products that it's in, so I've seen herbal supplements, for example, some Chinese traditional medicines, cosmetics is a big one as well, like face creams, for example, for its purported anti-aging properties. You can also just buy the gelatin itself. I've seen that available on Amazon. So eBay actually now doesn't allow the sale of EGO, and Amazon, as I checked, still does. So again, aside from legislative advocacy, it's also important, sometimes to write letters to companies to let them know about issues as well. But yeah, I mean, unfortunately, the demand, like I said, has been growing in recent years for EGO. So, cosmetics and basically traditional medicines, herbal supplements seem to be the most common products you could find it in. But it's, I think it might also be included potentially in some food products as well, though I think that's less common. And in the article that included in the handout section, provides some greater detail there. So it's a pretty brief overview, but worth looking at if you're interested in the issue.
Yeah, that's right. It was pretty disturbing to me that, I mean, if you just go on Amazon and type in EGO, the gelatin comes up. Like, you can just buy the gelatin on Amazon, and yeah, it's used in cosmetic products as well. That's pretty bad.
Yeah, that's terrible. That's an issue I think that a lot of people aren't aware of, and so it's definitely important that all of us as advocates are sharing that information. Thank you, Jen. Jen will definitely boycott. So let us know if you have any other questions in the chat. We can hang out for a couple more minutes. Oh, great. And we got a couple great answers for our polls. People are curious in future webinars about starting nonprofits for wild horses. So we do have resources on our website about starting equine rescues. So some of the information there is definitely transferable, but starting a nonprofit for wild horses, I think probably Holly and Michelle would be able to speak to that definitely. Some future webinars about social media, custody, keeping custody of animals, of horses, especially through that rescue system. Yeah. I don't know if anyone else has any other information that they want to share before we head out.
Those all seem like amazing, amazing topics.
Yeah. Well, thank you everybody so much for joining us. Thank you for all of the work that they do and your investment in equine advocacy. We have a question about the recording of this webinar. So that should be available in about 24 hours after it downloads. But you will get an email straight to your inbox with that recording. You are welcome to share that recording on social media, send it to anybody, and spread this information. So feel free to like us on Facebook and then Twitter, both HHC, but also AWI and AWHC. Keep your eyes open on those social medias for our next webinar, and don't hesitate to reach out to any of us. Specifically, if you have any advocacy questions, Michelle is a great resource, and then my email is tessa@homesforhorses.org. So yeah, you're going to get that resource in your inbox in about 24 hours. Have a wonderful day, everybody. Thank you so much for all that you do. Thank you for coming. Yeah.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.